All right, good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Okay, there we go. Okay, welcome to our Safety and Security Committee meeting. Yeah. Okay, we're good. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to our Safety and Security Committee meeting this afternoon. Glad everyone is here. I think most of our cohort is virtual today. Here in the boardroom with me is Superintendent Moore and Dr. Martin. And then I see board members Carter, board member Scott, board member Haggerty, board member Mahaffey, board member Johnson Hostler, board member Cash. So it looks like we have almost a full complement here. I did hear from Ms. Kushner that she probably would not make it this afternoon, so I think that gives us everyone. So we will move right into the agenda this afternoon. We've got several topics. And I want to try to get us out a little early this afternoon, as I know people are moving and itching to do some different things. So let's see. All right, so you see our agenda before us. Before we get started, we've got minutes from the prior meeting. So if you all would take a look at those. We are a committee of the whole, so any and all board members are members of the committee. So if I can entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the October 28th Safety and Security Committee meeting.
Motion to approve.
Chair Sutton, I second that motion.
So I got a motion from Dr. Martin and a second from Mrs. Cash to approve the minutes from our 10/28 meeting. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by sign of aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Thank you for that. We've got two items on our agenda this afternoon. Our first, we'll talk about results from the SRO survey and facilitation of focus sessions. I know that we sent out a survey out to the community a while back, and we've also had several focus groups. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gardner, and we'll hear about some of the results from that. Dr. Gardner.
Good afternoon, Chair Sutton, and thank you. And good afternoon, members of the board, as well as district leadership and Ms. O'Keefe, who's joining us for this meeting this afternoon. We know it's been a full week for you so far with meetings, and we are grateful for this opportunity to be with you to share two important topics that are tied to this committee's work. As you recall, when this committee started in its formation, when we were outlining the scope of work for this committee, one key piece of that involved a program review of the SRO program. And to do that part of the review, we wanted some data to collect you as the board could use to determine questions that you needed to explore and answer, as well as direction you wanted to take with the program. And just as a reminder, two driving questions that dealt with that, while there's others as well, was, is the district continue to wish to engage in contracts with law enforcement agencies in the different municipalities with SROs? And if the board decides that is the case, then what features of the SRO MOU do you want to examine, modify, or include in comparison to previous MOUs. So this is one step that the board has outlined, as well as the committee of this work, is to get some input from our stakeholder groups about the SROs and knowledge of the SRO programs, the role of SROs, and the use of SROs in our school. And so this afternoon, we are very grateful to have members from our Data Research and Accountability Department who have been critical in this partnership of administering the SRO survey and analyzing the data. And they're going to share with you the survey results and then our next steps to dive deeper into these results to get even a deeper understanding. So at this time, I want to thank Sonia Stevens and Brad McMillan from our Data Research and Accountability Department, who will begin to walk us through the results that we were able to get from our different stakeholder groups with this survey. Ms. Stevens, I'm going to turn it over to you at this time, and thank you.
You're welcome, partner. Good afternoon, Chair Sutton, members of the board, and Superintendent Moore. As Dr. Garner said, my name is Sonia Stevens, and I work in the Data Research and Accountability Department as the Senior Director of School Accountability. I'm assuming you all can hear me. I have a really loud fan that's going in my office.
We can hear you fine, Ms. Stevens. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Today I'm going to share with you the results from the SRO survey that was administered to students, parents, members of our community, and our school staff as a part of the overall SRO review that was requested by the board. As we go through the slide deck, I ask you to be patient. We do have several slides and some key highlights that we want to share with you. But also keep in mind that due to time constraints, I will only highlight the responses that we received, those that we thought were key. However, yesterday, Dr. McMillan did send you guys a copy of the full report where you can see in a lot more detail some of the results that we received. So the purpose of the survey was to gather input from our stakeholders about the SRO program that we have, as well as the bike patrol officers. And so today our desired outcomes, we have two. One, we want to gain insight from the stakeholders' perspectives that was shared in their survey responses. And we also will outline the next steps in the SRO program review, which will include the facilitation of focus groups. As I mentioned, we distribute the survey to students, parents, school staff, and members of the community. The survey was available from September to October and was provided both in English and Spanish. And you can see from the numbers on the screen, well over 54,000 people responded to the survey, which was targeted towards schools that have SROs, including the 10 elementary schools where SROs are assigned. However, it should be noted that the survey was technically available to everyone because it was posted on our website, so anyone could have access to the survey. After reviewing the survey results, we noticed three key overall takeaways. The first is that most of the respondents in each of the stakeholder groups, again, those were parents, students, school staff, and members of the community, had favorable perceptions of both the SRO program and the bike patrol officers, and they saw them as an important part of the school security plan. The second overall takeaway that we noticed was that there was a non-trivial percentage across the stakeholder groups who appeared to be unsure or unaware about SROs and their role in the school. For example, among students who said that they had an SRO assigned to their school, only about 1/3 said that they actually knew their officer's name. Additionally, some students and parents indicated they were not even sure if their school had an SRO. And finally, the last takeaway that I'll mention is that there are some differences in the responses by subgroup. Middle school students, for example, were more positive in their responses than high school students. Likewise, we noticed that parents and school staff were more favorable than students and members of the community. There were also some differences that we noticed among racial and ethnic groups. So the first set of questions on the surveys asked about general awareness and perceptions of SROs in the schools and focused on themes such as safety, treatment of school students, the school security plan, and welcoming environment. As you can see, the favorability ratings ranged from about 52% to 89%. Responses from parents and school staff members were more positive overall than students or community members. You will also notice that there are a couple of situations where you see that there's an NA noted. This is because we wanted to gather responses from the groups that we thought could answer the questions. So for example, we did not think students had knowledge of the school's security plan, so we didn't ask them that question on their particular survey. And the same is true for community members. We didn't think community members were in our buildings enough to ask if they felt like SROs provided a welcoming environment. So we didn't ask them that question. And so that's why you're seeing an NA posted under the community or listed under the community for that particular question. So on the following slides, you will see more detailed and disaggregated data for each of the questions that we're going to go through. So the first subject or topic is about presence at schools. So regarding school safety, as you can see, over 80% of community, parent, and staff respondents felt that the presence of an SRO makes the school more safe, and around 68% of students felt the same way. Most of the rest of the respondents reported that the SRO had no impact on school safety. When asked thoughts about if SROs treat students appropriately, over 75% of the parents and staff respondents said yes, as did close to 61% of students. But when we disaggregated the question about treatment of students further, we saw that Black students and the parents of Black students, while they responded positively overall, their responses were not as favorable as other racial or ethnic groups to this particular question. Most of the parents and staff felt that SROs create a welcoming environment in schools, but only 52% of the students agreed, which is an interesting result. Additionally, around 32% of students said that they were not sure if SROs created a welcoming environment. And then, so we looked at the welcoming environment a little closer, and we looked by looking at the question by subgroup and grade span. The favorability rating was slightly higher, we noticed, among middle school students. And thinking about building relationships between SROs and students, we know from research that the relationship between those two groups key in building a successful program. So among students who said that they had an SRO at their school, only about 30% indicated that they knew their SRO's name. This suggests an opportunity to work on building relationships between students and SROs. In terms of reporting incidents, in terms of students reporting incidents, the vast majority of students said that they were comfortable reporting an incident or a problem to an SRO, but there were about 25% who were not as comfortable doing so. This is another indication that ensuring a strong relationship between students and the SRO could be improved. So we also, as I mentioned, asked our stakeholders questions about the bike patrol officers. And we asked very similar questions about general awareness and perception to our stakeholders. And like the SROs, the overall perceptions of bike patrol officers was very positive. The overall perception was positive and ranged from around 50% to 81%. The responses of parents and school staff were more positive overall than students or community members. Additional results about bike patrol officers are provided in the full report if you want to see more detail about that particular group. So the next set of questions ask about the roles and proper functions of SROs and the bike patrol officers. So for example, respondents were asked who should be the primary responders to a host of adverse events that might occur at a school. The majority of the responses across stakeholder groups indicated that SROs should respond to incidents involving things like controlled substance, weapons, security at school, at after-school activities, theft, and trespassing on campus. On the other hand, respondents generally felt that school staff should handle incidents such as disgruntled parents and dress code violations. However, stakeholders were split with their beliefs about who should be the primary responder for fights, which is why you see we highlighted that in green on the screen. Over 45% of the respondents felt that SROs should be the primary responder for fighting, and over 39% felt that it should be school staff. So this split between SROs and school staff regarding fighting was consistent. We found that it was consistent across the students, the parents, and the staff in their responses. So this to us indicates that a clarification of roles and expectations could be helpful in this particular area. We also ask about the selection and placement of SROs, and at least 60% of the respondents felt our staff should have input before placement decisions are made with placing SROs in our schools. We might consider reviewing the selection and placement guidelines to determine if changes are necessary, primarily because currently our district does not have input in this process. On a related topic, respondents were somewhat split regarding who should handle inappropriate actions taken by an SRO. While guidelines are provided in the MOU, the responses from stakeholders suggest that this could be another area of potential clarification and alignment around expectations between the county and local law enforcement agencies. There is also a lack of consensus between teachers and administrators on whether SROs should respond to violations of the law, violations of Wake County policies, or both. According to the current MOU, it is appropriate for SROs to involve themselves in matters that are criminal in nature. The MOU is also clear that school policy violations are to be handled by school staff. So there is a need to provide clarity of SRO and staff roles for administrators, teachers, and other staff in the building. So SRO training is the last topic that I'm going to cover before I turn it over to Dr. McMillan. While most school staff feel that SROs are adequately trained to work with students in a school environment, there's still around 28% who are unsure about this. And this could be because staff may be unaware of the type of training that SROs actually received. So that's something that, for us to think about. Again, this is the last point that I'm going to talk about, but keep in mind for detailed results. I'm going to ask that Dr. McMillan talk to you about the next steps in the SRO program review.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Stevens. Appreciate that. Every data collection method kind of has its limitations. And one of the things about surveys is that you never get the opportunity to ask a follow-up question on anything. And so to make sure that this isn't the only piece of data that you all have to rely on as part of your review process, in addition to the data that Mr. Scott and Mr. Smith had presented previously about infractions, we are launching a series of focus groups to sort of dig a little bit deeper on some of these survey results. And on the slide here, you can see the same stakeholder groups that we conducted the surveys with are the same ones that we're targeting for the focus groups. And so what we're hoping to do here is unpack these survey results a little bit deeper and start to probe some of these questions where the survey just doesn't quite get below the surface on some of these issues. Those focus groups have already begun. There's one going on actually right now as we speak with a subset of teachers from the Superintendent's Teacher Advisory Committee. We're going to end up with multiple focus groups of students, teachers, administrators. We're going to have a parent focus group. We're also looking at focus groups with law enforcement officers from all of the organizations that supply SROs to our schools, the different law enforcement agencies and municipalities in the county. And take some of these overall takeaways that Dr. Stevens mentioned earlier and kind of peel them back a little bit more. Try and get a better understanding of why it is that so many folks are unsure about certain things about the SRO program, or where some of these disconnects and come in terms of how people feel like things SROs should handle or not handle, who should handle complaints about inappropriate activities by SROs and where that should really lie, and sort of start to unpack that a little bit and get a better understanding of sort of what's behind it. And so hopefully then by about the middle of February or so, you'll be able to have the data that Mr. Scott and Mr. Smith shared on infractions. You'll have the survey data that Dr. Stevens just shared. And of course, the report has a ton more charts and data in it as well. She was able to just really hit the highlights here today. And then the third piece will be these focus groups. And hopefully as a collective, that little body of evidence will give the board everything that it needs to kind of feel like they've turned over every stone and tried to figure out all the data that they have, so that when you make decisions going forward about the program, you don't find yourself in a position wishing you knew something that we didn't provide to you. So hopefully that comprehensive picture will sort of guide that those next steps and decisions for you all. And with that, I think our presentation is done, and we'd be Dr. Stevens or myself or Dr. Gardner be happy to take any questions that you all might.
Thank you, Dr. McMillan. Thank you, Dr. Stevens. We appreciate the information. I do want to acknowledge before I open it up for questions that there's a segment of the community that feels like the SRO survey, this survey, that some of the questions were defective or misleading. So I do want to acknowledge that sentiment, as we have received a few emails in that regard. But what I would say to that, and Dr. Maryland, you just touched on in the last slide, that this is not the only way that we are obtaining information from the community, from our students and schools. There are in addition to the surveys, the focus groups that are going on, and other ways that we're obtaining information. So this survey is not the only way that we are seeking input from a broad spectrum of the community, but I did want to just acknowledge that sentiment. So I'll start with questions. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the information. And I'm sorry if you could clarify. We had a little some things going on in our house. If you could clarify how the focus groups, how people who might be interested in participating in those, how are they able to reach out to do that, and will we also include input, or will our own safety, our own security employees, our security department, the Wake County Public School System, be a part of these conversations or a part of these focus groups as well?
Okay, I can go ahead and take that, Ms. Scott. So the focus groups that we've got upset right now, we're finding people in sort of different ways. I mentioned the teacher group that's going on right now is one of what we have planned as 3 teacher groups, and it's teachers pulled from the Superintendent's Teacher Advisory Committee. But the ones of students and staff and parents, we are targeting primarily middle and high school because we know that that's where the bulk of our SROs are. We are intentionally going to be pulling in a parent or two from the 10 or so elementary schools in the southwestern part of the county that have an SRO, just to make sure that we're not missing out on that perspective as well. And then I think for like the community groups and the other interest groups that are involved in this, I think we're working with our Office of Equity Affairs and our communications department to kind of figure out, to kind of source those folks from the people who have been most interested and invested in the issue. As far as if you have specific people who would be interested, I'm not sure what the best way is to handle that. Maybe to, gosh, I don't know. Dr. Gardner, I don't know if you have any advice on that about how we might want to handle that. I just want to make sure we're not routing people to the wrong place. That is.
Well, just to extend the conversation a little bit, Brad, of what you said, we are, from the community piece, looking at community advocacy groups that are in existence and trying to contact representatives of those advocacy groups, Ms. Scott, and asking if they, as the main contact for that group, want to be part of the focus group, or who they want as a representative from those focus groups. Then we're also doing kind of a randomization of teachers as well as randomization of students, both from the Superintendent's Teacher Advisory Council, the Superintendent's Student Advisory Council, as well as individual schools. We're getting random names to kind of give a very diverse group that's part of a randomization of equal voice of all. Our parents are going to be solicited by another randomization process of inviting a certain amount of parents to it. If we do not get enough to take the first, we will extend the invitation again. So we are allowing this the sufficient number in a focus session to be representative of the group in which they represent, but also adhering to a randomization process of getting individuals that want to contribute to this once they're invited. So if there is a particular advocacy group or particular stakeholder group that, and we were going to end with this, and eventually thank you for going ahead and asking the question, that the board wants to make sure that we try to leverage, I would ask that you send that to the Data Research and Accountability Department so that we can make sure that that's included in the list of who we would send invitations out to. But we've already got about 15 focus groups scheduled, which is going to give us a myriad of responses from different stakeholder groups. And we're excited that we've already embarked upon at least 3, if not 4, before we break for the winter break. And to your point, yes, the Security Department will be part of a focus group, just like our SROs from all the municipalities. We're going to have a focus group with them as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, I know there are advocacy groups who are interested. I've had several Wake County employees who are also interested in this work, and more so, to offer their thorough experience, their lived experience, and they're just interested in trying to make things as positive for all stakeholders. And so, just to be clear, if there's a specific person who's been reaching out regularly with interest, they may or may not be chosen, but should board members forward individual names as well?
Yeah, we would welcome that. Forward it to the Data Research and Accountability Department.
Okay, thank you so much. Those were my questions.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Scott. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and to the staff for answering your questions. My first question, which was very similar to Ms. Scott's, and so the thing that I'll kind of add on here, Dr. Gardner and Dr. McMillan, is to ensure, which I think, and I'm not going to put words in Ms. Scott's mouth, that we certainly know that there are advocacy groups and parents and students who've come before us with very specific complaints. And so I wonder, Dr. McMillan, have you all thought about how to ensure that the group does absolutely include people who've been negatively as well as positively impacted by SRO officers, ensure that we have focus groups that are absolutely sharing their lived experiences and the variance of the lived experience with SRO officers?
Yeah, I can say we've already reached out to some of those students who've been pretty well involved all along. I know groups like the Education Justice Alliance, we've also reached out to them through our Office of Equity Affairs. And I believe CELT is another group that we've been reaching out to. So, the folks who have been really plugged into the issues all along are sort of where we're starting with those community groups. And we don't want to leave anybody out, but we also don't want to miss those folks for whom, that have been really invested in this issue all along as well. And so I think some of that outreach has already occurred. But the community groups in particular, I don't think are scheduled until sometime later in January. So I'm not sure how firmed up those are just yet. I don't know, Dr. Gardner, do you want to add anything to that?
I do. Thank you, Dr. McMillan. Ms. Johnson-Hostler, thank you for that question. And you're exactly right. We want the voices of individuals who have those experiences to have the opportunity to be part of these focus groups. So where we know that those individuals have had very active interest in the SRO program, whether it's been promoting or looking at alternative options for SROs, we are reaching out either through the school to get those students involved, or we're reaching out to them directly. Those focus group sessions are scheduled more or less in January, and we're beginning to identify those individuals, especially students who have had an active role in our community with regard to wanting to express concerns or even ask questions or just explore about the SRO program. And a number of those students, in fact, are even coming from the Superintendent Student Leadership Council who have had varied experiences. We had a great conversation with the collective group and the last Superintendent Student Leadership Advisory Council, and based on some of the responses individuals gave, we've invited them to be part of the second layer because of their experiences. So bottom line to your question about involving students who have lived experiences or shared experiences that they want to be part of this process, yes, those opportunities are being given as best we can to engage those students.
Okay, and then my follow-up question is, are we also including either department leadership or supervisors of SROs in this as well? Or just the actual SROs?
I'm going to let Russ explain, outline some information on that, but I think it is a combination of both, Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you.
Great question. And so the plan will be to send out an invitation to all the law enforcement agencies that provide an SRO. And so it may not be the actual SRO of a school that participates. And then based upon the numbers of essentially what we're going to do is, again, reaching out and providing each agency an opportunity to provide a representative. So the anticipation is that we're going to have a mixed group of supervisors, SROs, and or policymakers at different departments.
Okay, and so a follow-up to that, Mr. Smith, while I certainly think the mixture will be useful in terms of feedback, but I'm also curious, I mean, I would assume, but I don't want to make assumptions here, that given we're not indicating who should come from those law enforcement agencies, is there a way that we can clarify that we want to make sure that they understand the SRO program and what's happening in schools to ensure that the people that are going to participate are actually well aware of how this process and the role functions within our school system?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We'll certainly make sure that whoever they're sending is up to speed on what the current, what the current conditions and or responsibilities of an of an SRO in the MOU.
Okay, thank you. That's it, Mr. Sutton.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Mrs. Cash.
Thank you, Chairman. So the population in a school that such as maybe PTAs or parents in a school that are not a part of an advocacy group, how are you reaching out to them?
Advocacy groups, you're saying, such as PTAs, Ms. Cash, and other types of groups?
So do you consider PTAs as advocacy groups? So you're reaching out to all the high school, middle school PTAs? That's my leadership.
I think as far as parent involvement, the way that we've tried to do it just to make sure that we get a reasonable cross-section of folks is we're trying to sample parents randomly from middle and high schools and ask if they'd like to participate. Knowing that not everyone we'll probably ask more than we'll actually end up getting, but we're not actually reaching out directly to any specific groups. I think our plan was to select those as randomly as possible, to get a reasonable cross-section of parents from all perspectives and all walks. I don't know that we had plans to reach out to PTA specifically as like a separate entity, though. Unless that's something that the board thinks we need to do, if that's like a group that we really need to fold into the fold here.
It's just, I don't know, it's just a question to me that when they don't actually get a question, or they do a survey, which is good, but they don't necessarily know that they have been reached out to. I just want an answer. That's all I need.
So I think, Brad and Lloyd, it may be helpful to look at how we get that cross-section of parents, perhaps by going through the Wake County PTA Council, who has an opportunity to reach out to their membership all across the district.
That's a good point. I'll make a note about that.
All right. Mrs. Cash, do you have another question?
Well, if I may, Ms. Cash, thank you
sorry.
for bringing that up. We were going to involve the Wake County PTA officer and somehow in trying to access PTAs through the form of parents, but
Oh, we lost you there, Dr. Gardner.
I'm sorry, Brad, did you lose me?
We did.
Yeah, you were muted.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Ms. Cash, I was just saying thank you for bringing that up. We were going to reach out to the Wake County PTA Council as far as whether it be the president to also make sure we had that cross-reference, but we also can make sure that we include the PTA somehow in some form with the mixture of parent representatives that we have.
Thank you, Lloyd. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Cash. Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you. I apologize for keeping my video off, but we're having some internet connectivity issues. I'd like to thank you all for putting this together and sending the more thorough summary to us. I noticed, Dr. McMillan, that it's in draft form. When will the fuller, rather than just the high level, but the fuller portions of the survey with the executive summary be available to the public, just so they can see it? Because I know there's been a lot of interest in this topic.
Good question. Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Yeah, it does say draft at the top. And to be honest, the only reason the report says draft on the top is because we wanted you all to see it today before we released it publicly. It is complete. We've got everything in there that we had planned on putting it in there, but before we released it to the public and removed the word draft from the upper right, we just wanted to make sure that the board had an opportunity to vet it first. So that would be tonight or first thing in the morning.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. McMillan. Chair Sutton, those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I think that covers our questions for this topic in terms of the survey. Again, thank you, Dr. McMillan, Mr. Stevens, for your work on this, and we look forward to the continued input and information coming from this survey and the other future focus sessions.
Thank you.
That moves us to our next topic, which is the overview of restorative practices and the Peace Builders program. And so, Dr. Gardner, I'll turn that over to you and let you introduce the staff that is coming forward.
Dr. Gardner, you're on mute, sir.
I keep forgetting to do that. I'm so sorry. I apologize. We know that part of the scope of the work, that as we've outlined this, that there's been great interest on the part of the board to learn more about our restorative practices, but at the same time to also learn about the Peace Builders program because of the interest in the board in knowing more about that program, as well as even some community interest in that program. So to try to provide this knowledge and framework for you, Paul Coe, our Assistant Superintendent of Student Support Services, and his team, along with Morris Pettiford, Senior Director of Counseling and Student Services, as well as Colleen Fitzpatrick from Restorative Practice Coordinator, will actually be leading this particular presentation. They have done a lot of work focusing on both, of course, the implementation of restorative practices in our district, but they've also started doing some research about the Peace Builders program so that they can build our knowledge base, both as a district as well as the board, and learning more about this because of your interest as well as the community interest in seeing how this may interplay with some of the work that we do. So I now turn it over to Paul Coe.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner. Good afternoon, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members. I'm here today, like Dr. Gardner said, with Dr. Marius Pettiford, Senior Director of Counseling and Student Services, Colleen Fitzpatrick, Restorative Practice Coordinator, and Misty Southern, Restorative Practice Facilitator. They're here in case there are any questions, but they will also be sharing their expertise as we move forward in the presentation. So we wanted to present to you a little bit of a continuation from our presentation from October 28th when we reviewed restorative practices. We wanted to give you a high-level overview of restorative practices as a refresher. And also, as we know that there's board interest in learning more about the Peace Builders program, along with some of our community members interested, we wanted to share a high-level overview of Peace Builders as well. We researched Peace Builders as a WCPSS team in partnership with Campbell Law to bring you our insights. And from both our overviews, we hope to deepen your understanding of how both restorative practices and Peace Builders are similar and different. And with those desired outcomes in mind, I'm going to pass it now to Colleen Fitzpatrick, our restorative practices coordinator.
Thank you, Mr. Coe, and thank you to the board for having me here today. I'm very excited to present some of the work that's been going on here in Wake County. I'm going to start off with this first slide, and that's just an overview of what restorative practice is. And just as reminders of this work, restorative practice is a series of tools that promote a culture of community. The basis of our work stems from our circle process. And that is our foundational tool that we offer to all members of our school community that have trained circle keepers. Circle does invite us to participate and bring our best self, and we welcome a collective perspective from all the people that are participating. Through this practice, a regular practice of circle, communities can benefit from a strong connection and potentially be used to address issues and create a plan that are rooted in a shared vision and a shared understanding. So this next slide talks about our core assumptions, because restorative practice is rooted in a tenet of 7 core assumptions. The first one being the true self in everyone is good, wise, and powerful. The world is profoundly interconnected. All human beings have a desire to be in good relationship. All humans have gifts. Everyone is needed for what they bring. Everything we need to make positive change is already here. Human beings are holistic. We need practices to build habits of living from the core self. These core assumptions have been developed through the work of Kay Pranis, who has taught us this work as a restorative practice practitioner and professional. And these principles can be found in our indigenous cultural traditions and the wisdom that represents the beliefs about human beings. Our next slide, please. Sorry. So here is a slide about our logic model. And this logic model is our plan for full implementation in Wake County Public Schools at this time. We began with the resources and inputs we currently use in order to build restorative practices in each school. With these resources, we are able to implement actions that train and equip educators as well as community members in restorative practices. Our intermediate objectives allow for coaching and implementation in all of our Wake County Public Schools with an overall outcome to improve behavioral and social and emotional outcomes for all members of our school community. So this slide is tiers of our work, and this visual represents that framework of our tiers, the tiers of support that can be offered to staff and students. And if we look at the bottom tier, this bottom tier represents the base level for circles that can be used to strengthen support and connections within our school community. If we move up to our tier 2 of restorative practice, this is how we repair some minor issues that can be done also in our circle work, in our circle way, in our practice of circle. And at this tier, we're able to offer support to communities that are experiencing levels of conflict, maybe with smaller groups through mediation and tools of circle. And then if we move to our third level there, our third tier, we have support in this tier from our restorative justice clinic to help with repairing harm. And this level is smaller amounts of students and individuals that are in conflict, maybe groups that are in conflicts or individuals that need tools that facilitate dialogue And they're tailored for rebuilding relationships and repairing some harm that may have been caused. When we think about, I'm going to go to the next slide. When we think about restorative practice, this is a really big idea, and we acknowledge that. But the work in restorative practice is something that's began as a seed under the direction and effort of Professor John Powell. He's a restorative justice practitioner, a defense attorney, a community member, a circle facilitator, an advocate for restorative justice, and a friend. And because of his initial efforts as a criminal defense lawyer, he saw this need firsthand for finding this solution for the school to prison pipeline. By creating the Restorative Justice Clinic at the Campbell Law School for law students, he was able to implement practices and restorative practice tools in some of our high schools and middle schools as early as 2009 here in Wake County. And it was really because of his initiative that we had caught the attention of the Kellogg Foundation. And the Kellogg Foundation, they granted us funds that supported 6 elementary schools in our county. And because of that work that we were able to do in these 6 elementary schools, we've been able to make some changes. In 2018 and 19, our restorative practice team was able to train and coach staff in these elementary schools. And these schools were chosen because of some disparities in suspension data. And after our initial granted year, the evaluators made suggestions that we should continue this work in our schools based on an increase in connections with school communities. So in 2019-2020 school year, our district also saw some importance of keeping this work going. And we've not just limited ourselves to these 6 elementary schools, but now we are open to bring this work to any school that is interested in restorative practices. We're currently in more than 150 schools, some capacity in over 150 schools, and we've trained over 700 circle keepers. This slide is just is a little vision about some of the impact of restorative practice in our school district. This data was provided by both outside evaluators as well as internal surveys that we had. More specifically, the suspension data reflects the 2018-19 school year, the Kellogg grant year. When we now we know each other's story, it's evident to us that when we know each other's story, we're less likely to harm them. And that's something we believe as in the practice that we work on. And our internal surveys from 2019 and 20 from our evaluation report, we were able to survey participants in our 2-day circle keeper training. And it was evident in some of the responses that they found some true connections to both their staff and their students. And then just some overview of some of the features of this, of the work that we're doing here in our county, is that restorative practice is not a program that can be done and implemented haphazardly. And best practices shows that school leaders need to have a full understanding, a full picture of what we are and what restorative practice is. We want to be able to bring this with fidelity and be very effective in our work. So it's important that school administrators that are interested in this work, that they attend an orientation session that gives them information in order to make an informed decision for their school and a true understanding of what the tenets of restorative practice are. During this orientation, individuals also get to experience what circle is, so they are a participant in this practice. After that orientation, their next step for schools is to meet with the RP team. Although we're small, we are mighty, and we do like to meet individually with schools so we can create an individual plan of what restorative practice looks like for their specific school. Many times this is where we set up a circle awareness, And we plan for all staff to attend this circle awareness so that they can also make the decision of whether that is something that they would like to get more training on as a circle keeper, which requires 16 hours of circle keeper training. We also offer refresher courses that are offered and their ongoing support. And facilitators work with trained staff at the school level to implement these practices in a way that meets the needs of their individual school. Restorative practice training focuses on building and deepening authentic and healthy connections with all members of our school community, including teachers, our support staff. We also invite custodial staff, transportation support, student services, administration, and others. So restorative practice is not limited to just staff and students. Restorative practice uses all the principles and practices that we've talked about earlier, but we also include our community resiliency model and mindfulness to respond to daily behavior and restore in a very restorative way. We want to be able to honor our intrinsic desire to be in good community with one another. So this is some overview of some of the features of our work. And some of the people that we're reaching, particularly staff at this time, by offering some support circles at this time virtually. And I'm going to pass the next part of the presentation over to Dr. Pettiford.
Thank you, Colleen. Unfortunately, I'm having connection issues, so it seems to work better when my camera is not on. So please forgive me for that component. What we do know is that there's been interest in this program from community. The first step that we took was to get an intern from Campbell Law to provide an external literature review of the Peace Builders program. The overall goal of the Peace Builders program is to reduce violence among youth. The program targeted at students in grades K through 12 in schools and after-school settings. Uses several strategies to address social competence and aggressive behavior among students. The idea is to improve a school's overall social climate and culture so that it is a situation that fosters positive communication between students and adults, as well as pro-social behavior among students. Peace Partners Incorporated is the sole source provider of Peace Builders, which is a developmental program for grades pre-K through 12. It is also a professional development program that may be purchased and implemented by a specific site or community groups or other stakeholders. Next slide. So students are taught the following 6 principles in the Peace Builders program. 1, praising people. 2, to avoid put downs. 3, seek wise people as advisors and friends. 4, to notice and correct hurts that you cause. And 5, to right wrongs. And 6, to help others. The program relies on the participation of teachers, parents, the school principal, and support staff to instill these principles in students. These adults are expected to teach, reinforce, and model these behaviors in order to foster the principles at a school or at home or in public places. This next slide shows the program features that are summarized for you. The program was first designed and studied in elementary and middle schools, K-8, and implemented in more than 1,200 schools and organizations nationwide. As of March 2011, we found that a high school program has been implemented in 24 locations continually since 2003, and a preschool program in 24 locations since 2005, and an after-school programs in 150 sites since the year 2000. One of the studies, Flannery and colleagues in 2003, evaluated the Peace Builders program using a randomized design with treatment and control groups. 8 elementary schools, grades K through 5 in Pima County, Arizona, were selected from 2 large school districts based on their high rates of juvenile arrests, suspensions, and expulsions. The total sample consisted of 4,128 students, and of these, 51% were Hispanic, 28% white, 13% American Indian, and 6% African American, and 1.5% Asian American. The study outcomes found overall significant, consistent improvements among students in teacher-rated social competence and self-reported peace-building behavior by the end of the first school year. But there was inconsistent results in the self-reported pro-social behavior. Overall, consistent significant reductions in teacher-reported aggressive behavior were found for all students by the end of the first year. By the end of the first school year, Peace Builder students in both grades K2 through 12, K through 2, and 3 through 5 received significantly lower teacher-based aggression scores compared to their peers that were in the control group. And I'll turn it back over to Mr. Coe and the rest of the team for any questions that you guys may have.
So that's the close of our presentation, and we will stop here for any questions or dialogue related to the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Coe, Dr. Pettiford, and those that brought that information. Dr. Martin, we'll start with you.
Yes, thank you for that information. I wonder if you could do a little bit of compare and contrast the two programs. You sort of presented them in isolation. It seems like there are some, similar functions, some different. There's a pretty significant cost that is associated with the Peace Builder. I hadn't been aware of that before. In addition, that would be in addition to any staff. What's the cost with the restorative practice? And you also gave us some effectiveness numbers, but it was kind of hard to compare the two. So can you do a little bit of, is this the kind of thing that they focus on two different missions, or it'd be one or the other, best implemented as a both? Help us understand a little bit of that. Thanks.
Thanks for that question, Dr. Martin. I'll actually pass it over to Dr. Pettiford and Colleen, who have the expertise, who did the research. So I'll let them speak to some of that.
I'm happy to start with that question. Thank you for that question. In my research and some of the readings that I've been doing in getting ready for this presentation is I do see that they have some similarities and wanting some similar outcomes is to have better connections in community. So I see that as definitely a similarity in this practice, but doing some of the work, very similar work than what's going on with our restorative practice work.
And then, Dr. Martin, the thing that I might add is that I think if you look at slides 9 and 12, slide 9, in the first step, it shows like in the first step, our aim is to build and deepen relationships with staff, students, families, and community from the restorative practices lens. And then Peace Builders also, their feature says, they have a desire to build positive relationships with parents and students. So in terms of the overall purpose of both programs, the purpose is the same. And I think when you think about just maybe more clear-cut differences, I think the way that the program is structured, I guess the content of what we're up to in restorative practices and then what Peace Builders are up to, I think there's some differences in the program structures where we focus on circles as the foundational place of practicing the core piece of everyone in a school building, to the conflict mediation circles, and then the facilitated mediation that comes with Campbell Law. And I think Peace Builders, it's more about, they have a curricular approach where they're trying to embed it, into general ed content, classrooms, and other common spaces. And one difference that we note is that I think some of the focus, I mean, in restorative practices, the focus is more around intrinsic rewards, and then Peace Builder, I think it has some similarities to maybe how PBIS is sometimes framed, where they emphasize tangible rewards. And I believe that the cost, there is a big difference, because with Peace Builders, it is a site-by-site program. So the licensing fee would be per site license fee, including the additional fees related to per staff, and then the coaching that comes with that. That's noted on slide 12 at $250 an hour.
I think the other thing to add too is that there's a significant difference in the training that would be provided, 2 to 4 hours for the Peace Builders program versus the 16 hours for our Circle Keeper training and the coaching that goes along with it. But certainly, if needed, we could provide that information to you guys in a chart format and get that to you.
That information is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin, for that question. Questions from other board members? Mrs. Mahaffey.
Thank you. I also would appreciate that chart as spoken to by in the last line of questioning. I'm curious, with Peace Builders, is there a lot of crossover, not just against restorative practices and PBIS, but other SEL programming that we see in our schools that may not be spread out, like Positivity Project? And where are we with different levels of MTSS? I guess I was more under the impression that the Peace Builder in a school was a trained mediator to help with conflict resolution, so that teachers and faculty members could continue throughout their day if a conflict were to arise. And the restorative practices piece was more of that community building piece in the at the classroom level, or for a smaller in-class level setting.
So, Ms. Mahaffey, thank you for that question. If I could try to reiterate what you're asking about are there similarities? One is, are there similarities to any other programs like Positivity Project that we're doing in our district? And you're also saying that your understanding as a component of Peace Builders was that there will be someone that would help with conflict mediation as well. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Not just, we have conscious discipline, capturing kids' hearts. I mean, are we just adding, is it adding one more thing that's already doing what we're already doing? Because I had an impression that a Peace Builder was a trained mediator in every school to help with conflict resolution. Because I know Campbell Law is wonderful, but they have limitations with how many students they can take.
Yes. So I think there are similarities to probably other programs, and I think we'd have to do a more careful kind of comparison of all the programs that are in our district, and get back to you on just a more cogent analysis of that. And when it comes to the conflict mediation piece, I think I'll pass it to Dr. Pettiford to add, but I think they are trying to build and train, the school site and get folks to understand all the tenets around Peace Builders. And I think my understanding is that from there, when conflicts do happen, there are, a number of trained adults who will be able to help address conflict, paired with the proactive steps that they recommend in their program. Dr. Pettiford, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I think one of the things that was really clear from the literature for the Peace Builders program is that the way that the program is described on the website and in the literature is that it was more of your tier 1 kind of response, that they're training teachers and staff members to be more, to have that mind shift and mindset of a Peace Builder. I didn't see anything in the literature that led us to believe that there was positions that were specifically ascribed to this or any connections to SROs in the literature. What we did find is that there are many components of the Peace Builders program that are already embedded in restorative practices. And from an ancillary point of view, there are things that are already connected to SEL work that we're doing. If you look at the CASEL competencies and the different ways that counselors, social workers, and other staff are working on those SEL skills for students and staff members. So yeah, I'm sure there are some connections with Peace Builders, and I'm sure we'll find some of that when we do that. But having the Peace Builder as the conflict resolution person wasn't something that I saw in the literature, and we know that that's something that can be done with our restorative practices work, and we're building to capacity for that. We've actually started doing more of that work with our current team in places where the Campbell Law cannot go out and do that kind of service. And I think, they're running conflict circles and dealing with such situations. And I think without, divulging names of schools and stuff, Misty has an example of some work that she did recently around working with a school around a particular issue that might be of interest to the team.
And Ms. Paffey, before Misty speaks, one thing I wanted to add is to more directly answer your question of would schools potentially see this as one more thing? When we presented at the BACs last school year, one of the things we mentioned was that the reason we're focusing on our programs like restorative practices and community resiliency model is that we know that a lot of schools have sought out their own programs to create positive school climate. And we've also, we used to have a larger emphasis on programs like PBIS. But, from our office, what we're trying to do with Student Support Services is to try to make the buffet a little bit more limited, right? And not have the options be so varied that the standard experience of students could be so different. And so I think there is the potential when Peace Builders, if Peace Builders was piloted or brought in, that some schools may see that as a duplication of things that we already have. So I think that's something to think about as board members as we consider Peace Builders as well. And then from there, I could pass it. Misty, did you want to share your recent experience?
Sure, I can do that. I was actually, a school reached out to me because there were issues with a team. It was an elementary school. And the person that reached out to me was a counselor and also a trained circle keeper, which is wonderful. And the people actually wanted to come to the table, if you will, to talk about the problem. Which is great. That is one of our tenets of restorative practices. It's always invitational because we want to make sure that people really want to be there and to have those moments where they can talk through issues. But what we advise and what we really focus on in Wake County is really building those relationships. Like we can't restore a relationship if one has never been established. So not to say that we can't get to that place, but really just, building capacity to understand people's stories like Colleen talked about. When we know somebody's story and we kind of understand where they're coming from, a lot of times that conflict will dissipate, which we are thankful for. So I do know that counselor, she came up with her circle plan and presented that, and she ran the circle this week with her staff and that group. And she told me that they are, they're building those relationships so they can go to those hard places. But we don't want to go to those hard places first, because usually we have to go back and start working with the building and deepening relationship, because it's kind of like a shallow outcome, if you will, if we don't have the depth there in our relationship. So that's what I would say about that and the school that I worked with this week.
All right, thank you for that question and response. Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you, Chairman Sutton. Hello, everyone. I appreciate the presentation and getting more information about this. It is a deeper dive. I'm having a couple issues, though, because I guess the programs that you all have described, at least to me, don't seem like they match up with some of the programs that have been described to us by community advocates using the same name. So, and like Dr. Pettiford's, the comments were really enlightening. And originally my questions were sort of, how would a program like this work? Would it fall under, the same similar programs that, he and his group administer? Would they be tied into school security plans, or would they relate to any of the work that Mr. Smith does? Could program, it sounded like these programs that you were describing could almost exist concurrently in a school with, SROs, but the advocates that have been talking and recommending this program, I think are talking about something very different, where, these programs would be a replacement for the SROs. So I guess I need a little bit of grounding again. If, are we talking, like the idea of training teachers and staff in conflict resolution doesn't sound like, I guess, what I had been anticipating, which were, I'll call them designated intervention counselors, or new designated staff that would come in and have like a proactive crisis intervention role. I don't know. Am I off base here, or is anyone else a little disoriented, or yeah? I'll leave it up to you all for any comment.
Mr. Haggerty, I'll try my best to maybe help your understanding. One of the things I wonder about is, from the foundational tenets of the Peace Builders program, it might be that some of our community members feel that a way to implement is to have, potential positions in a school that directly address the need for mediation when conflict arises. With the basic tenet that all staff get trained in the basic principles of Peace Builders, but maybe they've seen in various schools a type of implementation that designates specific people at a school site to possibly be these conflict mediation trainers. Like, for example, like I come from the Bay Area, so in San Francisco Unified, when restorative justice was initially implemented, specific targeted schools had restorative justice, coaches who would support the administration when things like fights happened or whatnot. And, that wasn't directly called a Peace Builders program, but that was a way that the restorative justice program was implemented as a district in San Francisco during that time.
The other thing I would add, Mr. Haggerty, is that we do have examples of restorative practices situations, just like Mr. Code mentioned. Denver Public Schools is one example where they have taken the restorative practices philosophy and actually created positions for each secondary school, so that you do have a designated person to sort of coach around the tier 1 work, but also to be that person who is the mediator when conflict arises that needs to be mediated in that particular instance. So there are models on the restorative justice side, restorative practices side, that would get at what you need. My statement was really that in the lit review, based on the Peace Builders name, we could not find any programs that had Peace Builders in lieu of SROs, nor could we find that there was a dedicated position for it.
Okay, Dr. Pettiford, I appreciate that. That explains a lot. And I mean, I do think in the programs that you reviewed, it sounds like there's merits to those programs and that they have had positive influences in those schools. It might just be very different. And again, this is something in talking to some of the students that have been advocating for a look at the SRO program or removal of those officers. As they've pointed to this program as an alternative, it sort of sounded like it was replacing one kind of staff with another kind of staff. So, we just might not have the information on, I guess, the alternatives, but I understand, based on the name and the programs that were out there that you looked at, I think this was a good review and a good presentation. I really appreciate you clarifying this for us. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Hegarty. Mrs. Katz, did you have a question, or was that a residual hand?
No, I have a new question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I think we are looking at either or. I don't think it's restorative practice and peace builders. That's how I would feel. They seem very duplicative. But I don't think that's a word, but I do believe that there are some schools that have had such good success with restorative practices and maybe SROs in addition to that. And I think schools are asking if Peace Builders is a program that this Board of Education buys into, could they choose our restorative practices that they've had very good success with? And thank you, all of Mr. Pettiford, Mr. Coe, all of these things that you have worked on, and their SROs. Could they choose? Because I do think it's an either or, because I think it is it's a duplicate of our restorative practices, and I'm pretty impressed with what we've done so far in restorative practices. So I guess my question would be, would schools have the option, if the Board of Education goes forward with Peace Builders, to be able to ask to continue their restorative practices instead of going into Peace Builders?
Ms. Cash, I'll take an attempt at responding to that, and thank you for that question. I think in terms of that whether we want to, do an either or of like Peace Builders or restorative practices and give schools options, I think we'd have to discuss that a little bit more as a leadership team to actually consider what are the benefits and challenges of that, because like I said with Ms. Mahaffey's question, we do want to figure out a way to focus and make sure our students' experience at every school is standardized along with flexibility for the school, but we don't want it to be so varied that it appears to have, kind of like competing interests going from school to school. Because I think that's some of the situation that we're in. We have some schools that are doing Positivity Project, and they're doing that really well. And what we've said to schools is that with those programs, restorative practices and other programs like Community Resiliency Model can be added. And I just wonder, do we need to think about, do we want to add one more option when it seems like there may be enough options that we have as a district, and if anything, we need to focus it a little bit more?
Mr. Coe, I actually think that's what some of the principals are saying. They're not really wanting another option right now. They really support what you guys have already done within our school system, and they are actually wanting to stay with that. So I don't think they're looking for another option. I think they want to be able to stay with what they've done.
And if Mr. Coe, if it's okay for me to add.
Absolutely.
I think, and Ms. Cash, I think what we're trying to do only in our third year here is to to continue the capacity that we've already started. I think we're still building, and I'm really proud of that, but there's a lot of people that want this work, and we're trying to get to them and keep in mind our fidelity, and also offer in our building process, we are looking at things like restorative responses, which would be things when conflict arises, how people respond to those. And I think those are some of the things that maybe SRO officers could also benefit from. We often welcome them to attend some of our sessions as well. So I think we could work maybe a little closer with schools and helping them with reaching some of these more restorative practice goals on an overview of a school, and when we look at a school as a whole.
I welcome that, because I believe that a lot of our our school sites believe that you can do that. I think they have bought into what you guys are doing already, and I think they would like to stay the course. So as a board member, I don't feel that we can afford to do peace builders and restorative practices, but I feel like restorative practices and the information that you've given me as what you're going to move forward to do has been very successful in Wake County, and I think our schools have been very bought into what you guys have developed. I just want to mention that.
Thank you for that, Ms. Cash. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you very much. I think I have a couple of my questions answered, but I do have one specific follow-up due to either Mr. Coe or Dr. Pettiford. Did we speak to any of the school districts that were referred to us by the advocacy organizations about how Peace Builders is implemented, meaning, new, because I think what I assumed, and so please correct me if I'm wrong, is I kept likening it to the middle school project that we did a couple of years ago. That was a joint project between Equity Affairs and Student Support Services, where we hired 25 new people to go into our middle schools to do very similar to what you've outlined that Peace Builders did. We just didn't call it that. And I certainly know, I don't have the data in front of me, but I'm sure I do in my archived emails. But we saw a substantial reduction in suspensions and more into restorative practices and reconciliation because there were the 25 adults that we put in those schools to work specifically with the middle schoolers. And so those students were not referred to SRO officers. They were dealt with through the 25 employees we hired at that time. So maybe I was completely wrong assuming it was similar to that pilot program that we ran. And so that's why I'm asking, did we talk to any of the districts that were referred to us that do have this in place?
Ms. Johnson-Hostler, I think in our research, we were doing more of a lit review and looking into the practices that were out there, but also pass it to Dr. Pettiford to see if he can add anything.
Thank you, Mr. Coe.
Yeah, when we talked with the intern from Campbell that did the external research for us, I know that some calls were attempted for some of the districts that were on the website of the Peace Builders program. Now, if there are specific schools that were mentioned from any of the community members, I don't have that information. So if there's something you guys want me to go back and dig a little deeper into, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Pettiford. I'm sure it's in my email, so I will certainly take a look at it. And then that way you can just refer it back to the researchers at Campbell to see if because it may be that they did contact them and didn't get a response. So I think that might be the easiest way rather than duplicating if that's a part of the work that they did do. So I will search through my emails and send it. Thank you for responding.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. Just a little bit of a follow-up to Mr. Hegarty's question, because I had some of the same question, and I've gone back to the one-pager that was presented to us. Actually, it was kind of a two-pager from some community folks, and they specifically note in this that a peace builder is an interventionist. That's a direct quote. They suggest that these peace builders would have a uniform, comfortable, casual, regular clothes, and so on. So the picture presented is very different than just the broader instruction that you've shared. So I also then just Googled Peace Builder and got to the link that clearly is the organization that you're referring to. So I'm not convinced that we're not getting a little caught up in language. And even, organizations, right? As soon as an organization, founds as a not-for-profit or whatever, they kind of corner the name. So are we talking about an idea instead of a program? Because I think some of the question is, should we have any kind of interventionist, for lack of a better term? I mean, the restorative practice is doing phenomenal work, and we're seeing a lot of success with that. I think if we look at the statistics of reduced suspensions and increased positive behavior in settings where the restorative practice is employed, we're seeing huge positives. But I think what's potentially being looked at here is to have some interventionists who would be the ones to maybe intervene in a fight, not just doing the positive preventative work. So I think there is a little bit of disconnect, and it's possibly due to the organizational name rather than necessarily the function.
And Dr. Martin, I think that might be a good point for us to clarify with the community members that have interest in this program of us implementing it. And maybe we can reach out to them to think through, get clear about what their suggestions are and bring that back for additional discussion. And I think I wonder too about, is it Peace Builders as an idea as they've seen in other school districts or other systems as the interventionist position, right? But I think in our research, it's important to note that we were really digging into what this program was about, and this is what we could find. And some of the examples that Dr. Pettiford noted is what we were able to uncover in our research.
Well, I guess the corollary to that is, would there be an interventionist type position as an appropriate addition? And I'm not we've got I think we confuse a lot of things. Is it an and or an or with SRO issues? But let's just set that aside for a minute. Would there be a role for an interventionist or more interventionist position even with the restorative practice? Because it seems to me that what I'm seeing, and again, hugely supportive of the restorative practice work, because I see it very preventative and also effective, responsive after the fact. But it feels to me like there is a little bit of a missing piece in the middle for dealing with the situation as it's unfolding, whatever the situation might be. I mean, the preventative work, you hope you never get to incidents. The major restorative work is after the incident took place. But I think there's an intermediate zone where, something's going down. Who steps in? The principal, clearly. There are times where the SRO, maybe. But I think a question is there that intermediate, in the moment position in the restorative practice structure?
And Dr. Martin, I could let Colleen speak more to this, but in that slide, it's in slide 6 where we're talking about the different tiers of restorative practices. I think that's the intention of that tier 2 of problem solving an issue as an intermediary. If we have not just the core tier 1 circle keepers that are about relationships, building community and everyday practices, we know that there are times those intermediary examples that you're talking about. And now Colleen and her team are working to think about how to build the capacity of our schools to be those folks, within the school to address those intermediary issues that don't turn into a fight that needs facilitated dialogue. But I'll pass it to Colleen to see if she can add a little bit more about that work.
Well, if I can clarify, it's what happens when the fight is taking place. That's the intermediary that I'm talking about. We hope to prevent the fight. And if there's a fight, we hope to restore after the fight. I think the question is, what do we do during the fight? And I think that's where this interventionist position is seen, at least to some degree. At least that's some of what I have heard.
Dr. Martin, you mean I just have to say this. You mean the intermediary position would be instead of the SRO, right?
Well, I'm trying to set aside the instead of, because I can actually see, I can see an and rather than an or, because there are some things where, a fight is going on, but it's really not a legal matter. There are other times where weapons related or something like that, now it becomes a legal matter. So, I mean, SROs are clearly focused on situations where you're dealing with the law. But there are lots of situations, lots of conflicts that happen in our schools that have nothing to do with the law, but there needs to be someone to intervene while the conflict is happening. That's the question of the position I'm asking about.
And I just want to be sure we don't have that opportunity in restorative practices to have that position through our own system. So that's what I want Dr. Code talk about, or Mr. Code talk about, is do we have that opportunity within our own system versus hiring an outside source to do that?
And Ms. Cash, can I reinforce? I agree with you completely. It should be within our system.
Thank you.
And Dr. Martin, just to clarify, I know you're saying that as the fight is happening, do we have that intermediary position? I just want to, affirm that I know our schools at the moment of a fight, they do have protocols to break up the fight, bring kids to the separate spaces, and make sure it doesn't escalate to a degree where it could be far worse than if there was no intervention. So there are those steps that we know our schools take anyways, particularly our administrators. But I think the thing that I want to reiterate with Tier 2 is we know that when fights occur, there are precursors, things that happen. There's a story behind the fight. And just want to note that the Tier 2 circles are to when staff members notice that there's a potential conflict or a potential fight brewing, that after class in the hallway something may happen. It's to train the capacity of our adults to be able to bring those kids together and resolve the conflict without fighting, and in some other way through facilitated dialogue that's not at the level of the facilitated mediation after a fight.
But if we're looking at peace builders right now, obviously we're not doing that.
Well, it sounds to me like there's maybe a problem with the name or the messaging. I mean, what has been presented to us from advocacy groups as peace builders is more of a mediator than what we're hearing from this Peace Builders program that was the center of the Lit Review.
I agree, Ms. Mahaffey, but so we're looking at actually having 3 things in our schools. We're looking at having our restorative practice. If that doesn't work, we're looking at having the peace builder mediate, and if that doesn't work, we're looking at the SRO to be the next before we call a 911. So that's a lot of options.
I don't.
So let me
but I think that's a broader conversation.
Yeah, Ms. Cash, let me level set a little bit, because I don't think we're at that point. Right now, we are just at a point where we are doing fact finding and gathering information. We're not at the point where we're making any conclusions, I would say, or even judgments or opinions about. I mean, certainly folks have their opinions about options or things taking place. So I would encourage board members to think again, be open-minded in our approach, and this is more of a I think a both and conversation than an either or. I don't think we don't have enough information to say that one program is going to replace another. I think we've always been a district that prides itself on providing options and opportunities. And I think having a menu of programs available to schools, to our principals, and not saying that, hey, you have to use this one program or other, particularly when it comes to, I think, discipline issues and safety and security. For one school, peace builders may work. For another school, it may be restorative practice. For another school, it may be both. But I don't think that we are at a point yet as a committee or a board where we are drawing or making that conclusion just yet. But we are very much still in a fact-finding and information-gathering stage. I've heard a couple of things and want to ask staff to do, if you will, Superintendent Moore. I heard the part about a comparative chart and some further analysis where those things are, the two programs are compared in a side-by-side analysis, if that's possible. If there also can be some examples of implementation, if there are districts that have implemented the Peace Builders program and what those actual examples look like. I heard Denver mentioned as a place and that sort of thing, and I think it will help the board to have some perspective in terms of examples of implementation. And I think that will lead to the third piece, and Mr. Coe touched on it, and that's connecting with those stakeholders in the community who have suggested this program to us. I think that they do have at least their own ideas of how this model would be implemented, and it would be helpful to hear, at least from them, what those models or those options look like, I would assume. And I think that they have mentioned particular cities or districts where this program has been implemented, and I think it would be helpful to at least hear their ideas about how this model might be implemented. And then I think as a board and staff, that helps us to think about then how this program may be scaled up, scaled down, or what have you, in a way that Wake County Public School System could use that, or if that's a fit for us. Is that fair? And I'm going to look to Superintendent Moore and Mr. Coe for any thoughts about that, and if those pieces are doable.
I think I understand what you're asking, Mr. Sutton, and I think I just wanted to take a moment. Staff today is presenting an overview that we asked Campbell Law folks to help us with a little bit because of a program that the board has gotten considerable messaging and literature about, and wanted to really just begin the demonstration of what the work is that's already happening in the district, what our learnings were about the Peace Builders program, and with no advocacy one way or the other about what would be next steps. It's just a review that helps us also understand what we're currently doing in the district, because in seeking a different program or another program, really what you want to do is identify where there are gaps, or if there's work already in place that's embedded, and then those gaps can be filled. And it's about what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So I think that what you're talking about in terms of more granular side-by-side comparison or examples for other districts could certainly be done for something like Peace Builders, but it could be done for any number of programs that may be out there in the communities that are alternatives or that are similar restorative practices work, to see how it stands up against the things that we are doing and what we can learn from them. But at the end of the day, we do have to define what the long-term objectives are and what we're trying to seek, and then how we best achieve that as a district. And I'll let Mr. Coe put in anything else that he'd like to say.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore, and thank you for level setting us, Chair Sutton. I think the next steps that we see are like you reiterated around, the comparison chart, reaching out to community members and bringing examples from districts with the Peace Builders. Ms. Mahaffey just generously sent me a reminder email about the report that was put together by our stakeholders around what they are proposing through the Peace Builder program. And I just want to note that I know in quickly reviewing that report, I know that the SRO, their suggestions around how to, their contention is to remove all SROs from WCPSS and bring in Peace Builders. So I just want to make sure that we remember that request is tied in with their advocacy for us to look into this program. And I think the long-range view that Superintendent Moore is talking about what we're up to, I think getting some direction from the board would be helpful as well in that regard about what's the long-term outlook with how we can, what our long-term goals are around restorative practices or Peace Builders and any work linked to those programs.
No, thank you for that, Mr. Carr. I appreciate that, and I also want to invite Dr. Gardner if you have any comments, because this is the point where we wanted to get to, and this is how you will see the agenda structured going forward as Superintendent Moore just sort of outlined, with the first part of the agenda helping us to understand and provide an overview of what we are currently doing in the district and what programs we have and how they are working. And then the second part or half of the agenda to focus on solutions, potential programs, options for us to consider, either in tandem with those programs that we're currently doing in the district or as a potential replacement. But we are not at the point, again, where we are drawing any conclusions about that to happen at this point. This is, again, simply fact-finding and gathering information on both sides of that, what we're currently doing and what other options are available out there to us across the community and across the country. Dr. Gardner, any comments? Or don't mean to put you on the spot, but any comments or thoughts that you want to share around that, being a liaison for this committee?
Yeah, you're not putting me on the spot at all. Thank you, Chair Sutton. And I think the overview that you, in combination with Mr. Coe, as well as Superintendent Moore, have been right on target with what the structure of these meetings have been to provide this foundational working knowledge of the information that, at the request of the board, wanted to know more about, because you will be entering a certain stage of your work where you will be looking at the SR program, making some decisions about it, as well as future SR MOUs. And so this is the third meeting of this committee since it's formed, and the agendas have been really intentional in the terms of their structure to try to be responsive to the areas that the board have wanted to know more about, but also building that foundation for decision-making and planning that will be coming in February and March, more than likely of moving ahead. So it has been that foundation piece and the overviews so that we can, one, give you the knowledge base, but also find out what more you want to learn about it so that you can make decisions appropriately. So thank you.
So I'll just say, and I'm not sure if I've got additional hands here, I'll ask, but just I want to be very clear that we are in no way at this point suggesting that Peace Builders, restorative practices is a replacement for SROs or anything of that nature at this point. We are simply gathering information, doing our due diligence as a committee, as a board, and any decision in that regard will not be coming until a later date as we move through this work. Let me go in order here as I see them on my screen. Mrs. Scott, did you have another question, or was that residual?
Thank you. I did have a question. I actually hadn't asked one yet on this topic. I know several of my colleagues have stated that the program that some community advocates have been mentioning, and I understand we are not looking to replace or remove anything, but was a program using a term, a peace builder, who, you know, an individual in a building that would be in lieu of a school resource officer. So that's what I think that is what we were just asking to gather information. How does this work in other school districts? What does this look like? And so I understand it's confusing because there is a trademarked Peace Builder program that operates in the same way or very similar to what a restorative justice program looks like that we have in collaboration with Campbell Law. And so I know that's been said, and I just wanted to say that was also my understanding through conversations with stakeholders and community advocates. And I shared your words, Chair Sutton, that you know, this is a gathering information, and it's important to do so. We're one of the largest school districts in the country, and we need to take a look and examine the programs that we have. And I do want to just sing the praises of the restorative program itself and also the practice of that. I had a school administrator shortly after I was sworn in my first term who showed me some just sort of preliminary data of having restorative conversations with students when there had been problems and looking at repeat office. And I've asked for this data. Can you show me the full data across the district for repeat referrals for those students? And at that time, and it was anecdotal, it was small, they weren't ready to present it, but it was zero repeat offenses. So when we're looking at these types of programs, this is not, hand someone a cookie. This is real work that builds agency, that works on, so many of the programs that we're starting to implement with SEL in our elementary schools. And it is important to look at this as a long-term work for our students, for the better of our students, and our commitment to helping educate young people who are ready to go out into the world and be engaged citizens, but also when they're in our buildings, we need to make sure that they feel supported. So I do just want to stress that I am curious about finding out more about districts who are using these programs, these people, this is not just, not to dismiss them, I don't mean to do just, but not training staff and employees who are already in the building, but bringing in people who are trained in this type of intervention work. So I just wanted to express that was also my understanding with those conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott. Mrs. Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. Yeah, I sent the document to Mr. Coe to kind of show the impression that I had when hearing the term peace builders, and again, as I said, envisioning it as more of a mediator rather than a trademarked restorative practice program. I think our restorative practices program with Campbell Law has done amazing work. I had the opportunity to sit in on a community circle that was hosted by some of our facilitators in the district. I think it is a great program. I'm more curious as to what a mediation program would bring for the district, because that's how I saw the Peace Builders program being, rather than an additional restorative practices program. And I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, for getting us on track to our process and that we're not at a decision-making phase. I certainly want to harken us back to what we've heard from stakeholders and reiterating, I appreciate the initial research that Campbell has helped us, as well as our staff, both Mr. Coe and Dr. Pettiford, all their team. And certainly I want to add that I do think it will be helpful to, regardless of the name that they're using, to hear from those school districts that were mentioned, Oakland and Denver, and I think Portland may be the third that we've heard about, who have different programs. And so I guess I'm acknowledging I'd like for us to talk to them, regardless of what they call their program. I think somebody calls them peace ambassadors. But I'm more interested in those districts who are doing this in addition to circles, but because they see this programming as changing the culture of the school, not just the intervention of a problem, so also preventionist in creating safer community environments. I'm sure you all have heard me say this before, but there's a great podcast that NPR did specifically on Washington, D.C. schools who had a pilot school where they really focused on changing the culture of the school rather than just intervening. And again, some of those things we heard from the builders that was presented today in the chart. So it does create a culture, high praises, but I certainly would like for us to speak to those schools, districts about who are doing this, their success or failures, or learn on changing culture in addition to intervening when there is a fight or a problem or disagreement. But if we can get feedback on what it looks like around creating strong school cultures. Thank you to the staff. And I will certainly forward some of the things that I've read from those districts. There are a couple of case studies.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Any further comment from staff or questions or points of clarity at this point, particularly from the comments that we've just heard?
No, Thank you, Chair Sutton. Thank you, board members. We'll take that feedback and take the next steps and work with Dr. Gardner to bring back more information to this committee.
Okay. Thank you for that. So with that, our next meeting will be in January. We had a bit of a compressed agenda, if you will, given the holidays here in November and December, without meetings scheduled for the last Wednesday of each month. So this meeting was really a combined meeting for November and December. So we will look to our next meeting in January and continue this discussion and look forward to some of the information or the analysis of these two programs to continue as part of the agenda for our next meeting, and continue to move forward and learn also about the programs and things that we have currently going on here in the district. Any closing thoughts, Dr. Gardner?
I just want to thank you and the time that all the board members have devoted this afternoon. It was great feedback, and we will continue to structure the meetings to give you the information you need for the decisions you will eventually make.
All right. Well, thank you, board members. Thank you, staff, for your work, the research that's gone into this. We can tell that you have put quite a bit of work into researching this information. That is greatly appreciated. Thank you, staff. Thank you, board members, for your time this afternoon, and for those that came out and made it over here to central office. To, again, everyone, have a safe, happy holidays, no matter how you celebrate. And thank you to also for the community that's tuned in. I know that there are a lot of folks that are tuning in to this meeting, as this topic has generated quite a bit of interest. So thank you all for tuning in. So with that, we stand adjourned to our next meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.